In 2007, a particularly disturbing case was featured on the 5th season of Snapped.
I've never seen one like that in my life, to entomb someone after death.
Absolutely liquefied body that was probably the first and only case that's come through here.
After nearly 2 decades, a deeper look into the investigation explores a killer's disturbing history of violence.
I lifted the lid of the trash can, and the odor was the unmistakable smell of death,
leading to the discovery of even more heinous crimes.
They found a adult male body, chopped multiple times in the back.
He had a bag over his face. This was an undeniable pattern.
And new interviews examine the motives that drove them to commit such unspeakable acts.
She attacked her because she hated her.
She was collecting those Social Security payments for about 2.5 years.
Leading to shocking new developments from behind bars.
Something unbelievable happened at the state prison.
She is cunning, sneaky, and I would not be surprised if she tries it again.
February 5th, 2001. At approximately 1:30 p.m., police in Las Vegas, Nevada receive an ominous call from the manager of a storage facility.
The concern that the storage unit manager had is that there had been numerous complaints of a foul odor emanating from somewhere in the storage facility. They said the odor was the unmistakable smell of death.
When officers arrive on the scene, the manager takes them to the storage unit in question.
The moment they rolled up the door, they're hit with a pungent scent of decaying flesh.
When they got in, they found a canister, a large garbage pail, like what you roll out to the curb at your house.
There was plastic wrap around the top of the trash receptacle, as well as duct tape.
They did a presumptive test for blood, which came back positive. That in turn led the authorities to pursue a telephonic search warrant, which would allow them to legally cut open the can.
Inside, I saw a human being in an advanced state of decomposition.
I've never seen one like that in my life. It was a terrible way to entomb someone after death.
They could not really tell how long the body had been there, because this body basically was sealed in this contained environment for who knows how long.
Cause of death is impossible to determine, but the circumstances suggest foul play.
They noticed that there was a bag that appeared to be tied around this person's face.
Somebody had taken great care and pain and effort in order to try to seal this garbage can. It certainly was done by an individual that did not want this body to be discovered.
I found a wallet with a driver's license in the name of Christine M. Smith in a plastic bag in the unit.
They learned that this particular unit was leased out and rented out to a woman named Brookey West, who was Christine Smith's daughter.
Our initial belief is that the deceased person in the trash can was Brookey West's mother, but we didn't know. We had to confirm that. We needed to locate Brookey West to see what she had to say about the situation, to see what she knew.
For both Christine and Brookey, life had always been a challenge.
Christine Smith grew up in a rural Texas town, and her father was a truck driver. Her mom was a stay-at-home mother, and things started to go south for Christine at an early age.
From the way she talked about her life, she had one traumatic experience after another.
In 1947, Christine met an El Paso man named Leroy Smith.
Smith was somebody who just came out of the military. He was now looking for a job and to start his own family. And Christine Smith and Leroy, they caught each other's eye, and eventually they got married.
Leroy joined the police force, and the couple had 2 children, Brookey and a son named Travis.
At first, it seemed like this was a dream come true for Christine. But over time, she would find herself in an abusive relationship.
Her husband, even though he worked for the police, was not law-abiding.
He was a known white supremacist, and he also became very interested in the occult and Satanism. At one point, Leroy left Christine for a cocktail waitress.
Leroy took the children, sending Christine into a downward spiral. She began an affair of her own with a married man named David.
She fell madly in love with him, and over time realized that she'd been bamboozled, that he had no intention of leaving his wife, and that he was just using Christine for sex. She asked to meet him at a bar. The man showed up, sat down. Christine pulled out a shotgun and shot him at point-blank range.
I was like, oh my God, how could you do that? She said, he discarded me. I was angry at having been treated like garbage.
Christine was quickly arrested after shooting her lover. She ended up getting a sentence of 14 years for an attempt murder charge.
However, Christine was paroled after serving only 2 years of her sentence. Upon her release, she was determined to turn her life around.
Christine comes out, she reunites with Leroy, and she comes back looking for her children.
However, 9-year-old Brookey and 6-year-old Travis were now living under state-sponsored care.
Once Christine was incarcerated, Leroy Smith decided he didn't want anything to do with his kids anymore and dropped them off at an orphanage. One day, they got a huge surprise. Leroy showed up at the orphanage with Christine. She had recently been released from prison, and Leroy and Christine took the kids back.
Leroy moves the whole family to California.
After high school, Brookey briefly enlisted in the Army before transitioning to a career in technology.
Well, during the military, Brookey learned a lot of skills, and it was in that time period when computers became more and more prevalent. She has innate ability to understand coding, numbers, very detailed information that she's able to memorize and maintain.
Over the next 2 decades, Brookey found great success in the field of technical writing.
A technical writer is someone who produces documents. You might write a manual on how to install a computer program.
Life was pretty good. She was able to buy a house in Los Banos, California.
But her mother had some problems. Her mother had been sick one occasion, and she would take care of her mother. She would move back and forth between Las Vegas and San Francisco for work, so she kept residences both places.
My understanding is that Brookey moved her mom to Las Vegas because it was a lot cheaper at the time than living in California. There was activity that Christine liked. She enjoyed being close to the casinos.
Brookey split her time between the two states until 1997, when the 44-year-old permanently relocated to Las Vegas to live with her 65-year-old mother. The pair settled into a happy rhythm. But 4 years later, their reunion has ended in tragedy. A decomposed body has been discovered hidden in a storage unit rented by Brookey, and investigators want to know who it belongs to.
The can with the body inside was transported to the Clark County Coroner's Office, and a very unusual autopsy unfolded. They took the can and basically tipped it upside down and poured the contents out onto a gurney.
Absolutely liquefied body that was probably the first and only case that's come to here.
There was insect larvae, maggots, that were on and around the body. And authorities collected many samples of these insects.
The cause and manner of death was unknown. There was nothing obvious, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, none of the things you might associate with some kind of violent event.
The victim's teeth are intact, allowing the coroner to use dental records to positively ID the body as Christine Smith. One mystery has been solved, but more arise when detectives take a closer look at the items in the storage unit.
There were books dealing with witchcraft, books dealing with black magic, books dealing with Satanism, and things of that nature.
The crime scene itself was so unusual and so bizarre that you can't help but ask, could these be related? Could this involve Satanism, witchcraft, occult behavior?
Coming up, investigators dig into Christine and Brookey's past.
Some days you thought that they loved each other dearly, and other days you thought they hated each other.
And they uncover a second mysterious death.
There appeared to be a bag over the victim's face.
Detectives in Las Vegas, Nevada are investigating the disturbing death of 68-year-old Christine Smith. It's a crime scene unlike any they've ever encountered.
Of course, Las Vegas has a real dark side to it. But the idea of finding a garbage can with a body in it in a storage shed and books about witchcraft and Satanism, I mean, their minds were spinning as to what could possibly explain this.
Her daughter, Brookey West, is the first person they need to speak with.
They had a lot of questions regarding Christine Smith. First and foremost, how did she die? But the bigger question was, how did she get in that garbage can? And why is she in a storage unit that came back to Brookey West?
When police check Christine's last known address, they discover it was also leased to Brookey.
The two homicide detectives ended up getting a search warrant and going to her apartment.
They knock on the door and Brookey Lee West is not there. They went inside and started looking around. Clearly a nice apartment, lots of nice belongings in there.
There was not a lot of furniture in there, but clearly it had been occupied.
It appears that only Brookey had been living there. Investigators also find several pieces of suspicious evidence.
We found duct tape. We found what we believe to be the key to the lock for the storage room that Christine's body was in.
When they did a forensic analysis on that duct tape, they found that it was a perfect match to the duct tape that had been wrapped around the garbage can. Investigators then started to really take a close look at the paperwork that they found in the apartment, specifically bank records. They noticed that Brookey Lee West was collecting money, Social Security, that was supposed to go to her mother. And it made for a very suspicious circumstance and a likely scenario that Brookey was involved in her mother's death.
They speak to Christine and Brookey's neighbors to try to shed light on their relationship. What they learn is eye-opening.
Some days you thought that they loved each other dearly, and other days you thought they hated each other.
I didn't really want to get involved at all, you know, so Sandy told me a couple things about him every once in a while.
They had this kind of double-edged relationship. They would fight, they would be at odds with one another. It was a back and forth kind of up and down situation.
According to Christine's friends, the source of the conflict dated back to Brookey's childhood. Christine's own upbringing had left scars and poor boundaries for raising her daughter.
It seemed like Christine was very dysfunctional, and she needed Brookey for that dysfunction.
Christine basically taught Brookey how to be a criminal. When she was a child, they became shoplifters and swindlers and grifters, and so this was Brookey's role model. Growing up, it became apparent to Brookey that she needed to get away from her mother, so she decided to join the Army.
When the two reunited and began living together, the dynamic between them seemed to flip. Now, 44-year-old Brookey was the one in control.
When she offered to take care of her mother, she made it clear there were limitations. Christine was not allowed to have visitors to their home. She was not allowed to talk about what went on in their home or about her relationship with Brooke or anyone else.
In approximately January or February of 1998, Christine just seemed to fall off the face of the earth. When Christine's friends started to inquire about what happened, they started asking Brookey Lee West, where's your mother?
What Brooke had told everyone is that she had been taken to live with her brother Travis.
The neighbors thought it was suspicious because she had heard Travis was severely mentally ill, that he was not able to take care of himself, that he was walking the streets and was homeless.
It just didn't make any sense at all, and they quickly concluded that this was all a big lie. She had not been seen since nearly 3 years prior to the discovery of her body.
To investigators, the news seems to confirm their suspicions about Brookey's involvement.
Well, about an hour after they left her apartment, the manager called and said that Brookey West had returned to the apartment, but had left. And the manager had a description of her vehicle.
At one point, they do in fact spot Brookey driving in her truck, and she is pulled over and taken into custody and arrested on a charge of murder for the killing of her mother.
The only thing that Brooke ever told the police was, my mom died of natural causes.
According to Brookey, she found her mother dead in 1999.
She claimed that she simply panicked and decided to dispose of her mother in the garbage can.
News of the horrific crime scene and Brookey's arrest seizes headlines across the country.
The circumstances were so unusual that it drew a lot of attention. And that media coverage made its way to California. Las Vegas police learned that Christine Smith wasn't the first person close to Brookey Lee West who had died under suspicious circumstances. A detective in California reached out to the Las Vegas detectives to let them know that, hey, just a few years earlier, Brookey Lee West was my prime suspect in her husband's murder.
After learning that Brookey West was connected to a previous homicide, Las Vegas investigators asked their counterparts in California to walk them through the details of that unsolved case.
On June 6, 1994, Tulare County Sheriff's Department received a 911 call from a tourist who was visiting the Sequoia National Forest. This individual who was picnicking with his family discovered the body of a male that was found on the side of the road.
Officers responded, and it was clear that this was a homicide, and there appeared to be a bag over the victim's face. They looked for any signs of a weapon and couldn't find anything.
There did not appear to be any foul play around the location.
They quickly concluded that the victim had been shot elsewhere and that this was actually a dump site. Fingerprints were taken from the deceased, and they soon found out that their victim was a man named Howard Simon St. John.
The body of Howard St. John was transported to the coroner's office for further analysis.
Authorities looked at the condition of the body, and they were able to determine that he had died relatively recently, within the last 12 to 24 hours.
Howard St. John had been shot multiple times in the back. Either he was running away in fear for his life, or he was completely shot by surprise.
They also uncovered an interesting clue, which was a .32 caliber bullet was lodged in his neck, and it appeared to be from a separate shooting. It did not appear to be related to his death. Howard had been shot in a separate incident, and he survived.
Based on the limited amount of healing from that earlier gunshot wound, the coroner believed it happened just a few weeks prior.
They learned that Howard had a significant record involving petty crimes, mostly involving alcohol abuse.
He was from a tough side of town in the San Jose Bay Area, San Francisco. He had been in and out of jail. And they also learned a very important fact, which was he was in a very tumultuous marriage with a woman by the name of Brookey Lee West.
Investigators contacted Howard's family to learn more about his marriage and his life.
What they learned was that Howard Simon St. John was born in May 1958 to Sylvester and Catherine St. John in Redwood City, California. They traced him to a nearby Tulare County Indian reservation. He had a history there, grew up there, and wanted to explore his Native American roots. He'd been there for many years and had at one point a stable family life early on. But, over time, Howard struggled with alcohol and drugs and ended up homeless.
After several years struggling with addiction, Howard's friends got him into a shelter and he started Alcoholics Anonymous. He and Brookey met at one of the meetings in the spring of 1994.
Brookey West was attending these AA meetings not because she was an alcoholic, but she was actually bringing her elderly mom, Christine Smith, and she suddenly started eyeing Howard St. John.
She appeared to be well off, well-dressed, beautiful woman who was very successful.
He showed up in T-shirts, unkempt clothing, did not seem to have any money, and those are two people that you would not have expected to see get together. But a relationship blossomed. Next thing you know, Howard St. John is telling everyone that he was moving into Brookey's home.
Within a matter of a month or two, they ended up going to Reno, eloping, and getting married in Nevada.
In this investigation that I received from the Tulare County Sheriff's Department, there was a notation about the first domestic violence that occurred about 2 weeks prior to Howard's death. On May 21st, about a month after they got married, there had been an altercation and domestic violence situation, and Brookey used a firearm to shoot at Howard. He was shot in the neck.
So on June 9th, 1994, investigators went to their home in California to question her about his death.
You have a prior domestic dispute involving gun violence, and then a few weeks after that, Howard turns up dead. So it would be logical for the authorities to really scrutinize this relationship.
Coming up, an unsolved death sheds light on the current murder investigation.
I was surprised and kind of eerily seeing similarities.
And detectives try to bring a remorseless killer to justice.
This case was about greed, hatred, selfishness.
After Brookey Lee West emerged as the prime suspect in the investigation into her husband's murder, California investigators went to their home to question her. A woman answered the door, but it wasn't Brookey. It was her 62-year-old mother, Christine Smith.
When the authorities talked to Christine Smith, she had very negative things to say about Howard Simon St. John. She said that he was a bum, that he drank all the time, he didn't work, and that, frankly, her exact words were, he's as crazy as a bedbug.
Nobody understood his purpose in Brooke's life. He didn't appear to have any job because he would be at home whenever she was gone to work. In comparison to Brooke, he was a slob.
She said he had a long-term alcohol problem and had a history of being violent with Brooke.
In the process, too, she started talking about the incident that happened 2 weeks prior.
She said that Brookey had accidentally put Howard's wallet and identification through the wash, and that they had been arguing about this, and that Howard was acting violently.
She reached for a gun and fired in self-defense.
It was a miracle that Howard even survived the gunshot. He had been shot in the neck at very close range.
Brookey was charged in the shooting incident, but the case was dismissed.
After the shooting, Howard told the authorities he didn't want her prosecuted. He wanted them to drop the charges. Against advice from his family, his friends, and everyone else, he quickly reunited with Brookey.
Christine told them she didn't know why Brookey decided to take Howard back after his recovery. Detectives were interested in asking Brookey the same question. And before the interview with Christine was over, they got their chance.
Suddenly, Brookey West came home. She was very charismatic and open and willing to talk to detectives.
Brookey Lee West told a very similar story to her mother, which was that she had shot him in self-defense. So those two accounts aligned with one another.
She kind of painted the picture that she had a very soft heart for him, that she loved him. She wanted to have that relationship succeed.
But according to Brookey, Howard seemed to have other plans.
After things had calmed down, Brookey worked that whole weekend before returning to Los Baños and learned that Howard was no longer there and had stolen $3,000 from her.
She said he had taken that money and gone with some associates to Reno and gambled that money away.
Brookey claimed she never saw her husband again. At the time, California investigators could not confirm her alibi, but without direct evidence of her involvement, they moved on to other possible suspects.
Howard had a record of having individuals that he wronged over his lifetime, and so they wanted to continue to see if there were any other potential persons of interest that they wanted to talk to.
They were very, very meticulous about this case. They assembled hundreds of interviews. They really did their homework, but the case just never came together.
That case files sat with the Tulare County Sheriff's Department for many months, going into years, as unsolved.
But 7 years later, Las Vegas detectives wonder if Brookey is responsible for the deaths of both her mother and her former husband.
Now, you've got two dead bodies of people that are closely associated with Brooke.
I was surprised and kind of eerily seeing similarities with what happened to Christine Smith and with what happened to Howard St. John.
Howard had a bag over his face, and so did Christine Smith. This was an undeniable pattern.
Now we have to look at Christine's death and find enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Brookey West killed her mom.
While there is no statute of limitations on murder, the evidence isn't strong enough to charge Brookey Lee West in connection to the murder of Howard St. John. Crime scene technicians comb through the storage unit looking for any other evidence to tie Brookey to Christine's murder.
They did a very extensive examination of the cellophane and duct tape around the garbage can.
To my amazement, the crime scene investigator was able to find and recover a fingerprint that was on the inside of the plastic cellophane wrapping.
When they did an analysis of that fingerprint, they found out that it was Brookey Lee West's print.
That was a pretty good indication to us that Brookey at least had some hand in sealing the trash can.
I think that one day Brookey just snapped and attacked her mother because she hated her. She hated all the childhood trauma that she had been put through. She'd never had stability in her life, and Christine was going to pay the price for it.
Brookey West is a diabolical individual. She didn't have a good relationship with her mom. She decided to kill her, and she was collecting those Social Security payments for about 2.5 years until she was discovered.
This case was about greed, hatred, and selfishness.
The fingerprint is a solid piece of evidence, but as Brookey's trial date approaches, Prosecutors wonder if it will be enough to convict her.
Did I feel comfortable going to trial the way it is? Absolutely not. How do I prove to a jury that this was done by criminal means with criminal intent?
On July 3rd, 2001, 5 months after Christine Smith's body was discovered, her daughter, Brookey Lee West, stands trial for murder.
A lot of cases you've got a murder weapon. A lot of cases you might have a confession. They didn't have any of that with Brookey.
Could Brookey have just simply panicked and disposed of her mother's body but didn't kill her?
The defense presented the idea that the body may have had some natural disease that no longer is viewable, and I had to concede that that was possible.
But the prosecution argues that a crucial detail about the crime scene proves Brookey's claim to be false.
There would be no reason to put a bag over someone's face if you just panicked.
I have a theory about all that. It's based on the Satanic Bible. I read it in order to see if there was a connection. By placing something over their eyes, that person is damned forever to be stuck in their own demons.
They bolster their case with the expert testimony of a forensic entomologist.
You would have expected within minutes, if not within the hour, blowflies would have colonized the body. But we don't have the blowflies. That gave an indication that Brookey must have had the garbage can ready, the cellophane wrapping ready, and the duct tape ready. The lack of blowflies suddenly gave me the option to, based on science, to argue that this was premeditated.
The body most likely went into this can very shortly after it died, or possibly even when it was still alive.
On July 19th, 2001, the jury delivers its verdict.
A jury took just 2 hours to convict Brookey Lee West of first-degree murder. Brookey Lee West was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
I absolutely feel that justice was served in this case. She did it, and she needs to suffer the consequences.
There are certain crimes that, are beyond the pale, and this was certainly one of them.
How can anybody do that? Especially your own daughter, murder her mother that way? Shocking, really, even now.
6 years after the verdict, Brookey's case is featured on the 5th season of Snapped. But her story doesn't end there.
Nearly 10 years after Brookey Lee West was convicted of murder, something unbelievable happened at the state prison where Brookey was serving her life sentence.
July 20th, 2012. Brookey Lee West has been incarcerated since 2001, when she was convicted of murdering her mother, Christine Smith.
So Brookey's housed at Florence McClure Women's Facility in North Las Vegas. It's the prison for the state of Nevada for female prisoners. Brookey was by and large a model prisoner. She taught art classes. She was involved in pen pal groups, all kinds of things to try to be productive even though she was in prison. I think the structure of prison suited Brookey fairly well.
11 years after her conviction, it's Friday morning visiting day, and most inmates are preparing to see family members. But Brookey is occupied with something else.
Brookey had taken some art supplies and hid some art supplies. She managed to dye her hair, and she managed to store away some clothes from a guard.
She had changed her clothes and made her way all the way to the front entry, of the prison and was on the verge of walking out.
She was able to get through multiple checkpoints and was just stopped at the last one. She almost made it, but she was arrested trying to walk out the front door of Florence McClure.
She's now housed in a maximum security facility, and that she's no longer in the Nevada Women's Correctional Facility. Brookey West is very crafty. She is cunning, sneaky, and I would not be surprised if she tries it again.
The story surrounding Brookey Lee West and her exploits have made her one of the most notorious killers in Las Vegas history. And while she remains in jail for the gruesome murder of her mother, authorities were never able to prove Brookey was responsible for the death of her husband.
She was a professional, high-income, attractive woman, a technical writer, someone that you would never, ever think was capable of this type of violence. But behind the facade was a very dangerous human being. The people who were close to Brookey were traumatized beyond belief by this whole series of events. And they just cumulatively came to learn that they were in the presence of a predator.
Howard St. John was in the wrong place in the wrong time with the wrong person.
Christine was colorful, she was chaotic, she was troubled, she was friendly, she was funny. We should remember Christine as a victim, despite all her flaws.
I really felt bad for Christine. Really, the whole thing, you know. She never deserved that at all.
I loved Christine. She was uniquely her, but everybody has good qualities and bad qualities, and I can accept them as they are. We all have good and bad in us. No one deserves to die at the hands of a murderer. No one.
Plombiroy, Ombi, the shadow and the light, where is Ned, when the world was still full of possibilities. Is Leroy Stutz was older, possessed of a rugged, dangerous charisma that often lures women who have spent their lives being good. Onabi Stanby. To Kumba, Leroy was a project, a man who had been through the fire and come out tempered. He told her a story that tugged at her empathetic heart. He had been to prison, yes, but he told her it was for a robbery. Orphy, difilitamai, essentially a friend, in. He told her he noble sacrifice that led to 18 years behind bars. Gwantul quite traumatized. In the beginning, Leroy would ve kepateje hat her in the studio, his eyes fixed on her as she commanded the airwaves. He was the bad boy who seemed reformed by her light. Ondan, the fendon NB offer onabi the tanker, that kept him from drifting back into the abyss. Winnie. He's different, Mom, she told her mother on a Saturday morning in June. He, yes, had a hard life, but he's trying. He just needs someone to believe in him. Economatized. Her mother, Mrs. Sisbey, looked at the man with the guarded eyes and felt a cold shiver. Immigrant intuition is a sharp tool, honed by surviving real monsters. She saw the way Leroy looked at Kumba, not with love, but with a terrifying sense of ownership, way in Igor. He wanted to capture it in a jar, light, fi. The green-eyed monster, Kwan when Kumbas, bright, for Leroy to handle, unnaisot. At first it felt like a romantic partnership, the queen and her consort, but the microphone is a truth-teller. On the air, Kumba was natural, beloved, and professional. Leroy was a thug trying to play a role he hadn't earned. Leroy. They wanted Kumba, Onya said. Talking. Leroy would growl in the car after a show. You think you're better than me because you got these fans? Wise. It is my show, Leroy. Kumba would respond, her voice tired. Mot built this. Mot met, trying to bring you up with me, but you have to work for it. On quite traumatized. The jealousy was a slow-acting poison. It curdled into rage when Kumba invited another woman to co-host a segment on female empowerment. Leroy went wild. He felt his territory being encroached upon. Onby complied. Behind the glass, he erupted into a rant so degrading, so filled with misogyny, that Donald Hilliard had to pull the plug. Ocean Leroy, Hilliard told him, his voice firm. Yuri jeopardizing everything Kumba built, while Kumbata. He blamed Kumba. In his twisted mind, her success was his humiliation. Boon. The revelation. Seemed. The illusion finally shattered. Woman of research, Kumba was a woman of the truth. The rumors began to trickle in from the underground intelligence network of Houston. People whispered about Leroy's time in the Texas State Penitentiary, on a Lynchny Gate robbery. Kumba, her friend Latasha White, told her over coffee. The word is, it was murder. He killed someone back in Chinmihai. He got 45 years and only served 18. Onitar occupies. The man she shared her bed with, the man she had defended to her family, was not a misunderstood rebel. He was a killer. Rumors. Rumors of sexual history in prison that Leroy would kill to keep quiet. When Kumba confronted him, the bad boy charm vanished, replaced by the cold, vacuous stare of a sociopath. We cornered. Mot met done, Leroy, Kum whispered, the decision finally solidifying in her heart. Mot, can't you do this anymore? You lied about everything. Onting incised. She began to plan her exit. The most Detective Harris would later note, the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is the moment she decides to leave. Unbinta said. The night of the warehouse. Onal ties it. The air was thick with the coming holiday. Kumba was dressed to kill, not literally, but with the confidence of a woman reclaiming her life. She was going to a party hosted by a concert promoter named Carlton Turner at a warehouse on the southeast side of town. I traumatize. It was a Bubbles and Beetle. It was a bubble-shaped car that matched her personality. Bright, unique, and impossible to miss. Haltized. He couldn't let the prize go. Vacation the parking lot as the party wound down around Mimotso Yer, home food, p.m. The warehouse lights flickered, and the sound of distant hip-hop muffled the sounds of the struggle. Kumba shouted, her voice echoing off the corrugated metal. Mot told you. It is over. Go home, Leroy. Think you just gonna walk away? Leroy's voice was a low hiss. After everything Mot did for you, you nothing without me. Offing indeed. He grabbed her purse, he grabbed her arm. Kumba fought back. She was a shaker, and she would be moved easily. She scratched at his face, her nails drawing blood above his eye. Her lanyard, carrying her ID, snapped and fell into the oil-stained gravel. Quantumebi said. Then, the cold steel of a pistol pressed against the back of her head. Ontlebi. The American detective describes this moment with clinical precision. But the reality was a nightmare. Leroy forced her into her own car. He didn't see the ID card lying on the ground. The first of 1,000 mistakes a sociopath makes. When he thinks he is a genius. On Houston was silenced. The voice of gunshot wound to the head. The voice of Houston was silenced. Bond. Chapter Sau, the transfer of blood. Onen, Esu Ait, Panimk. He drove Kumba's Blue Beetle to the South Park neighborhood, a place where he thought a body could disappear into the urban landscape. Untingatized. He stopped the car across from Jones High School. He dragged her out, what the detectives would call transfer blood, and dumped her in the ditch like she was a piece of garbage. Honore, offer, and jury. To a domestic killer, the prize is the silence of the victim. Huisen. He arrived with blood on his clothes and scratches on his face. Equal to Pashling. Detroit. Tiroi told Darrell, his eyes darting. Don't ask questions. Only with Lois. Darrell, caught in the web of family shirt and shoes. But Leroy, in his haste, left behind a pair of brown polo boots. They sat in the corner of the room, silent witnesses with Kumba's DNA clinging to the leather. Borbay. The investigators, Onan, harassed. Bannock detective, Brian Harris, sat at his kitchen table, sipping his first cup of coffee. When his phone rang, he didn't need to look at the caller ID. Peter, is Harris, only in case. At the scene, he met Michael Perez. The contrast was stark. Harris, the grizzled veteran who had seen the worst of humanity for 22 years, and Perez, the young detective on his first lead case. Withy. Mike was wailed, maybe early 30s. No ID. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head. It's a mess, Brian. Wesai solely. They looked at the scene. They saw the way she had been discarded. Harris looked across the street at Jones High School and saw the surveillance cameras. Invited to the party. Harris said, on a baby, but it told us gray, but it told a story. 2 headlights, a vehicle stopping, a figure dragging something big toward the ditch. The car was small, dark, and shaped like a bubble. We beetle. Perez whispered, Bonad. The hit, on hing. Brought the fingerprint hit, hinge 10 heat. Kozio. 31. Also why traumatized. He had to make the death notification. It is the hardest part of the job, arriving in a suit, holding a badge, and watching the light die in a mother's eyes before you even speak a word. Reported Mrs. A. Usinda Kumba, the Coveney, listening, who had traumatized. The house was with the sense of Sierra Kumkumba would never eat. The family was devastated, but through their grief, they provided the roadmap. Relationship. David Gabriel, a crucial detail. She had a car, a blue Volkswagen Beetle. Eaton pivoted. David Gabriel had an ironclad alibi. He was at a party with dozens of witnesses. He was a bitter ex, but he was a killer. We knew ceased. Then came the report from Texas Southern University. A car fire. Quantly. The arsonist's folly, the all-blue Volkswagen Beetle, was found smoldering across from a TSU dormitory. The windows were rolled up, which had stifled the fire, leaving the interior charred, but the evidence intact. Figent, Harris said, examining the wreck. But he didn't give it enough air. Yuri not exactly the brightest bulb in the fixture, Leroy. Guasin. DNA swabs were taken. On BTAs. Showed the mystery players. At Heiser Bayfoot, AM. On July 28, the Beetle was abandoned. A day later, a Buick LeSabre pulled up. A figure stepped out, rummaged in the Beetle, and then, whoosh, a flash of gasoline and fire. The figure ran back to the Buick and sped off. On BETS. Ran the registration for Buick LeSebs in the area. One name popped up. Latrice Stutz. Leroy, and's daughter. Regain. The interrogation. The net was closing. Carlton Turner called the police about the bloodstained ID card found at the warehouse. Donald Hilliard told them about the radio station rants. The cousins told them about the boots. Questioned Harris. Brought in Latrice. The tension in the room was palpable. Harris, the master, watched as Ferez, the student, took the lead. Odd. Father. Latrice. Wolney evasive. We aren't close. He has been away a long time. We some. Banyan Finn. Ongoing. What they do behind closed doors is their business. Wishing it over. She admitted seeing him get into the Beetle. She did see the fire, but her statement placed the monster at the scene of the cover-up. We moot. Chapter the sociopath. Traumatized. Leroy Stutz was arrested a week later. Stepping out of his mother's car, he didn't fight. He didn't cry. He simply existed, a hollow man with no remorse. Honestly. Bond, Harris, used a technique he had honed over decades. He drew a word on the whiteboard. D-E-R. Oddboard Leroy. What letter are we missing? Roy said, his voice flat. Awfully right. Murder. It looks like murder, it spells like murder, and all the facts lead to you. We re just missing the last piece. Your story. Waitenkunistite. In the room he sat there, Nhol, his eyes vacuous, and denied everything. He thought he had covered his tracks. He did not realize that Kumba's voice, the voice he tried to silence, was speaking through the evidence. Octamid inside. The car door, the daughter as testimony. The warehouse ID. Commuer high. Justice and echoes. Undindly, they're formally tutized. Leroy Stutz was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. He was sent back to the state penitentiary, a place he will never leave again, with Havel. But the story doesn't end with a gavel. Woman. Sisay, who lost her golden girl. White. Who tune into the listening bay, Cham Chin, and wonder what Kumba's voice would have sounded like today, had she lived to see her dreams come true. Boyton traumatized. It ends with Detective Perez, who learned that being a detective isn't about the badge. It's about finding justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Aunt died. Kumba Sisay was a mover and a light. Leroy Stutz tried to steal that light, but in the end, he only succeeded in highlighting his own darkness. Quiet, but the echoes of Kumba's ambition still ring through the streets of Houston, a reminder that even in the face of a monster, the truth cannot be burned away. Office, note, Konkifinam events, Surunkumye Bawaits, while the detectives, suspects, and primary events. These elus affable quai, surrounding ice, nosebys. On the documented case, dialogue, and internal monologues have been dramatized for the purpose of this novelistic retelling on the airwaves. On a novel by Gemini, Remote. The Pulse of Southeast Houston, dramatized. The Houston humidity was a living thing. It draped itself over the city like a wet wool blanket, smelling of asphalt, exhaust, and the distant, briny promise of the Gulf. For Kumba Sesay, however, the heat was just fuel. Omedon, icon. Hi. Kumba stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting a silver hoop earring. She was 31, a woman who moved through the world with the rhythmic grace of someone who kano eve, kept exactly where she was going. Uswalkol Tolispart. Skin was a rich, polished mahogany of Sierra Leonean heritage, and her eyes held a spark that even the most grueling double shifts at the radio station couldn't could dim. It could be a star, Kumba, she whispered to her reflection. It wasn't vanity. It was a mantra, on glowed with the logo of Style Radio. She was more than just a host, she was a curator of culture. On the air, she was the voice. The woman who could bridge the gap between hard-hitting social commentary and the latest underground hip-hop tracks. Ontili. To her, listener, she was invincible. To herself, she was a woman working twice as hard to build a kingdom from scratch. Loosely. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Leroy. Wenchentreist. Coming to the warehouse later. Don't have me waiting. Ovenes Creed, Moslor, Brumtod. A year ago, a message from Leroy Stutz would have made her heart skip a beat with excitement. He was the classic bad boy, with a smooth tongue and a story for every scar. Onawi, responded. He had told her he was a reformed man, someone who had done time for a robbery he didn't commit. Taking the fall for a friend. Kumba, with her empathetic heart, had seen a diamond in the rough. She thought she could be the one to finally polish him. Crucial list. The jealousy had started as a low hum. Every time a fan complimented her, every time her ratings climbed higher than his guest spots, Leroy's smile would teuro no into a thin, bitter line. We can't. One last night of pretending. Bolt, before the house at Novenkal. She did know in her life. Before the 4th of July fireworks could even be lit. Queen Mai. The man in the mirror shadow. Ontized. Leroy Stutz sat, watching the entrance to the radio station. He adjusted the rearview mirror, not to check his appearance, but to watch the world behind him. 18 years in a Texas penitentiary did that to a man, often in Italy. It stripped away the ability to look forward. You only ever looked over your shoulder. All Yastui. He remembered the heat of that year too. But back then, he was young, impulsive, and convinced that the world owed him everything. One by Kuwai Stopatai. The murder he used get him Dinsderstein. His nomken, Amolisni, had been a misunderstand. The sociopathy to mask the sociopathy that lay beneath his skin, like a dormant virus. Gurkenaby. Offer. He saw a lifeline. She was beautiful, successful, and, most importantly, she was respected. By standing next to her, he felt the borrowed warmth of her light. But the light was starting to burn him, immediately. Traumatized. She thinks she better than me, he hissed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned ashen. Traumatized. He had tried to be a radio personality. He had tried effortless connection with the audience. But when the microphone turned on, Leroy didn't find inspiration. He found rage. He had gone on rants, degrading the very women who made up Kumba's core demographic. Oningili Chad had finally cut him off. Ability. Leroy. Don had said, Reformer. Mind, it wasn't his fault. It was Kumba's. She hadn't defended him enough. She hadn't used her power to keep him on the air. Guondanopasan, fussing intent. He reached into the passenger seat and touched the cold metal of the pistol, tucked beneath a discarded jacket. He didn't plan to use it. Not yet. He just liked knowing it was there. It was the only thing in his life that never talked back, never grew more popular than him, and never tried to leave. We buy. The discovery, or the morning of July. Barode began with a silence that was fard, for us far too heavy for a holiday weekend, ording St. John's High School. He was Louis, South Park neighborhood. A young boy skipped toward a patch of grass. He was looking for a lost ball, his mind filled with thoughts of the tomorrow's barbecue and the Roman candles his dad had bought. Why, he stopped. He was sleeping in the grass. or so he thought. But the man was too still. The man was wearing clothes that looked expensive, but they were stained. Ve capite. Ha, something dark and crusty. Quant mister, the boy called out. Ocean, no answer. Boshenicomite. The boy ran. He didn't know. He had just walked into a nightmare. Opry still, banning a tent list. When Detective Sergeant Brian Harris arrived on the scene, he was still holding a lukewarm cup of coffee. He was a veteran of the homicide division. 22 years of seeing the worst things humans could do to one another. Om in familia, in his jet, and velt verfamiliat. Heavy tug in his chest. Wanded. Harris said, nodding toward Pemot, upon trying traumatize. Perez was Danublad, only 3 months into homicide. This was his first lead case, and Harris could see the tension in the younger man's shoulders. Early 30s, Perez said, his voice clipped and professional. No ID. Multiple clipped and professional. No ID. It looks like she was dumped here, Sergeant. There transfer blood on the asphalt. Someone dragged her out of a vehicle like she was trash. Mutter. He saw the jewelry, gold earrings, a necklace. Auto robbery. Harris muttered. Robbers don't leave the gold. This was personal. This was shut up and stay down kind of violence. All traumatized. Across the street, the surveillance cameras of the high school stared. Dov kept no, like unblinking eyes. Onine gaze Mike. Harris ordered. Let's see who drove the hearse to this dumping ground. Wake on. The unraveling mask. Olben. Barnaby listit. The news began to trickle through with a tight-knit community of Houston's independent media. Walgredat. Latasha White, Kumba's best friend, was the first to feel the chill. Kumba hadn't answered her text since Saturday night. That was to like her. Kumba was the queen of the check-in. A dingly fuel. Ruba. Then came the rumors. He found near the school a blue Volkswagen Beetle missing. Often chastened. She thought back to the conversation they had 2 days ago. Undali Melison. Tiftesha. Omot Kumba had whispered, her voice trembling over the phone. Leroy. He didn't go to jail for robbery. I saw a paper, an old clipping. It was murder. He killed someone in Chimihai. Untraumatized. Latasha had begged of him. Right then, but Kumba, ever the diplomat, had insisted on doing it her way. Mott have to talk to him, Tasha. Mott have to tell him, we redone in a public place, so he does to go crazy. Mott meeting him at the warehouse party. Umi monetize. Latasha sobbed into her hands. Why didn't you just run? Waitai sighs. In the underground world of Houston, Leroy was already moving. He was a ghost in a Buick Le Sabre, his daughter Latrice behind the wheel. Ultris. Leroy snapped. Don't ask questions. Just take me to the TSU campus. Quali to be. Latrice looked at her father. He had scratches on his face, deep red gouges that looked like they had been made by fingernails. She saw the madness in his eyes, the same madness that had stolen 18 years of his life, almighty by fear. But in the Stutes family, loyalty was enforced by fear. Of your praise of the Canter sat the Blue Beetle. Kumba's pride and joy, awfully traumatized. Oriban. Leroy hopped out. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the risk. He just wanted to erase the blood. He wanted to erase the memory of Kumba's eyes. As she realized the man she loved was a monster. One, whoosh, what erupted it in a beautiful, terrible, orange glow. Leroy watched it for a second, too long, the reflection of the flames dancing in his pupils. O chapter num. The interrogation of a sociopath. 1 all-caching. Barnaby, detective. Harris said, his voice like sandpaper. Always. Leroy had been found at his mother house, stepping out of a car as if he didn't have a care in the world. Now he sat in the interview room, his hands cuffed to the table. Grace stood in the corner, watching. He was learning from the master, wondering. Harris didn't start with the murder. He started with the radio. Opinus died. Harris lied, a real natural. It said. A shame Kumba was the one getting all the sponsors, though. That must have hurt. A man like you, playing second fiddle to a woman. Ace nice. Kumba was my girl. I supported her, Com said. Did you? Harris leaned in. Then, why did your cousin Darrell find a pair of blood-stained boots at his house? Your boots, Leroy. And why does your daughter say she drove you to a car fire at TSU? I don't know what you're talking about. People lie. My daughter? She is confused. Cotimord. He wrote 5 letters. U-D-R. All Findlay said. What is missing? Or stare at the board. The R. Otenin. Exactly, Harris smiled, though his eyes remained ice-cold, Rosming and traumatized. We have the blood on the boots. We have the video of the dump. We have the scratches on your face. We're just missing one piece. The R. And the R stands for reason. Why did you do it? Kobe, agree. Abani. Leroy? Was it because she found out about Monin Chincham Chin Mihai? Or was it because she realized you weren't a star? You were just a shadow. With note lies. For us, Leah's eyes darkened with a primordial rage. On my phone be so low. The microphones barely caught it. She thought she could tell me what to do. She thought she could leave. It wasn't. Perez added from the corner. Umatais. It was a hollow, chilling sound. You look lung never understand. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to be stepped on. Kumba forgot which one she was. Upo. The echoes of a life. Otin traumataita. The trial was formality. The evidence was a mountain that Leroy Stutz couldn't climb. Front row, every day, clutching a photo of her daughter. She didn't want a death. She didn't wanted Leroy to live. She wanted him to sit in a cell for the rest of his miserable life, surrounded by the silence of the voice he had tried to steal. Of my tie. Guilty of murder in the 1st degree. There were no cheers in the courtroom, only a profound, heavy sense of relief. Ondisi Nene was gone, but her voice wasn't silent. Pomanant, Fomanaiv, Kamikli, Pomantaiv. Weeks later, Don Hilliard sat in the radio booth, his empty chair where Akumba used to sit. He pressed a button and the airwaves filled with the recording of her last show. Omila Sese, int itu camp your head up, Houston. Don't let the shadows dim your light. You are beautiful, you are strong, and you are heard. Flani Matais, Onama. Outside, Ausin was setting over the South Park neighborhood. The heat was still there, but a cool breeze was finally starting to blow in from the coast. Onabil. Reflection. Our reflection, Onabi, ete the Sayatais. He spent his days on his porch, far away from the blood and the sirens. But sometimes, when he hears a certain song on the radio, he thinks of the girl in the ditch. Ochentavnin. He thinks can be turned into a nightmare by the wrong person. Confession. Perez told him once over a beer. We didn't need one, Harris had replied. The truth has a way of screaming, even when the voice is gone. Besoming instantly, and manabi veltently, or sently. In Houston, the voice of Kumba Sese, a reminder that while stars can be extinguished, the light they leave behind can never truly be buried. Usnai, Unnabi, and the pursuit of justice. Anovea felt traumatized. Mubak. The silence of Southpaw, Borming Misau, began with a deceptive. In Houston, the heat does just arrive. It settles like a heavy humid blanket, smelling of damp earth and the distant promise of barbecue smoke. On traumatized. Dice, in the South Park neighborhood, the trees stood still, their leaves with the previous night's dew, as the city prepared for the boisterous celebration of the 4th of July. Onby, Greerly 10 years old, pedaled his bike along the edge of the street near Jones High School. He was looking for adventure, or perhaps just a bit of breeze. Instead, he found a man sleeping. Or so, he thought. The figure lay in the grass, half shrouded by the morning shadows. There was something wrong with the stillness, a rigidity that defied aught the casual nature of sleep. The boy felt a prickle of ice down his spine, a primal warning that bypassed logic. He didn't call out. He didn't approach. He turned his bike around and pedaled home as if the devil himself were at his heels. Eyes. He gasped, bursting through the screen door. There's a man. He's not waking up. Gumanukut Mahabist. When the father arrived was far grimmer. The man was a woman. She was young, her skin the color of polished mahogany, now marred by the dark, viscous stains of a life stolen. Oftenly morning coffee. Across the city, Detective Sergeant Brian Harritt was enjoying his first sip of Sunday morning coffee. He was a man who had seen the worst of Houston, a veteran of 22 years in homicide, who knew that the city's beauty often hid a jagged edge. Juan. Banane Combictain traumatized when his phone vibrated against the granted countertop. He didn't need to look at the caller ID to know that the weekend was over. Olis Harris, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. Gully Sarge. South Park, across from the high school, it looks like a dump job. Kelly, Dumasawisli. Somewhere in the city, a family was about to have their world shattered. Somewhere, a killer was watching the sun rise, thinking they had gotten away with it. Quaysend. Not on his watch. One. The voice of the city. Weight of Nate. Kumba Sisei was a force of nature. To her parents, from the war-torn landscapes of Sierra Leone to the sprawling concrete heart of Texas, she was the American dream made flesh. On it, she was a mover, a shaker, and a woman who refused to be contained by the labels others tried to pin on her. White Bossel or Fink. To the listeners of Style Radio, she was the voice that woke them up and made them think. Often to guide. Kumba's voice purred into the microphone, a perfect blend of honey and grit. Kontafabi, who had a Ritlu, had his Kumba Sise. Today, we re-talking about generational curses. Can we break them? Or are we destined to repeat the mistakes of our fathers? Wantifuin, her eyes sparking with Inchliden. In the booth, she was a queen. Outside of it, she was a rising model with a smile that could light up a room, and an ambition that burned like a white-hot star. The boy just want to be famous. She wanted to be significant. She wanted to bridge the gap between her African heritage and her American reality. Wantini and be afenimatized. He sent by traumatized, a flautuilkaist. She spent her days interviewing hip artists who had nothing but a dream and a beat, and her nights planning a future that reached far beyond the Houston city limits. Commiation, he Siebel. He skill at Tromadad, Kambay. Donald Hilliard, the station's general manager, said through the glass. He leaned against the console, a look of genuine admiration on his face. One of these days, a national network is going to snatch you up, and Mot Luglung be left here, with nothing but memories. Laughed a bright melodic sound. Don't worry, Don. Mot Luglung mentioned you in my Emmy speech. Wendell traumatized. Her oversized designer bag, her notebooks, filled vekep, ite, hate, ideas, and her various charms. She was a woman who lived a together life. She was careful, she was loved, and she was going places. Uninigenekeitais. Banatais, you said, his boy traumatoside, but Kumba had a weakness. It was the same weakness that had claimed so many bright stars before her. She believed she could see the light in people who were drowning in shadows. Wade Leroy Stutz. Under all too, the charm of the broken, omissioning Vietnamese, for a local hip-hop label. Lee met at promotional older, with a stillness about him that Kumba mistook for maturity. He was rugged, with eyes that seemed to have seen more than they let on, and a story that pulled at Kumba's heartstrings. Ambigubil. Made mistakes, he told her, one evening, as they sat in a dimly lit lounge, the sound of smooth, a dead humming in the background. Mott spent time inside. But it wasn't for what you think. Mott took the fall for a friend. A robbery gone wrong. Mott met a loyal man, Kumba. Maybe too loyal for my own good. On of injustice. Felt a surge of empathy. She saw in Leroy a bad boy who had been wronged by the system, a man who needed a chance to rebuild. She didn't see the sociopath hiding behind the facade of the reformed convict. Offlin decades ago. He spoke of was a cold-blooded murder committed decades ago. Uisnashis. He learned Kumba's rhythms. He praised her ambition. He even joined her on the radio show, his voice a deep, comforting presence beside hers. Entingly. He's different, Mom. Kumba told her mother, Mrs. Sise, during a Saturday morning visit. He's been through a lot, but he's trying. He supports me. Ontingabi. Mrs. Sise, however, had the intuition of a woman who had seen the darkness in men's hearts. There is a coldness in his eyes, Kumba. Be careful. A man who has been in a cage for 18 years. He does not always learn to be free. Sometimes, he only learns how to be a better hunter. Ot Kumba said, kissing her mother's cheek. You worry too much. Mot met a big girl. Mot can handle Leroy. Unadu edges. But as the whale, together life, Kumba had built began to fray at the edges. Leroy wasn't just loyal. He was possessive. He didn't just support her. He wanted to own her. Or popularity. When Kumba invited woman to another woman to co-host a segment, Leroy's reaction was explosive. Wandigadi. Yuri trying to put traumatize out. He roared in the privacy of their apartment, his face contorted with a rage that terrified her. You think you read better than me because of this little radio show? You read nothing without me. Quite traumatized. Kumba cried, backing away. It's just business. You read being irrational. Ombi traumatized. The reformed by a monster disappeared, who was as fragile as glass. He went on air the next day and launched into a misogynistic rant, so vile that Don Hilliard had to cut the feed. Osmoteis. You redone, Leroy, Don said, his voice trembling. Vekepte. Hot anger, get out of my station, and if Mort see you near Kumba again. Mort met calling the police. Coming of the end, but in Leroy's mind, he wasn't the problem. Kumba was. She had insulted his pride. She had tried to empower men, as she said on the radio, but she hadn't it empowered him. Quanchinad lies. That was a crime punishable by death. Ofindi. The unraveling of eating at lace. Approafte with an oppressive heat. Kumba felt the weight of it in her bones. She had finally made the decision. She was going to end it. Ontin fint intently. Whispers from the underground. Stories about Leroy, fast time in prison, that didn't match his tales of loyalty and robbery. She heard about a murder conviction. She heard about his behavior in the yard, Benny Leshen. Most disturbingly, she heard rumors about his sexual history in prison. Information that Leroy, obsessed with his own alpha image, would go to any lengths to suppress. And traumatized. Mot met done, Latasha. Kumba told her best friend on the phone. He lied about everything. He's not the guy Mot thought he was. Mot met going to meet him tonight at the warehouse party. Mot met going to tell him it is over in a public place. He won't do anything if there are people around. Wondercoot. Latasha felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Kumba, don't go. Just text him. Just change the locks. Inchintimbi. Mort, have to do this, face to face, Kumba insisted, her Sierra Leonean pride asserting itself. I wanna be bullied. Gwensiri, ofte. On the night of July Hainyed, Kumba dressed with care. She wore her favorite jewelry, a symbol of her independence. She got into her blue Volkswagen Beetle, her little bubble of safety, and drove toward the southeast side of Houston. Gwinteist. The warehouse was a cavernous space, filled with the thumping bass of independent hip-hop. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, expensive cologne, and electricity of a crowd. Kumba found Leroy near the back, his eyes dark and brooding. The way when talk, she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Golaishin, let's go to her R. Let's go to the car. Kami. We re-staying here. Overall traumatized. The music was too loud. But the crowd was shifting and Kumba made the fatal mistake of thinking she was in control. They walked out into the parking lot, the humid night air hitting them like a physical blow. Wheaties. The murder Leroy, Kumba said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mot know you lied, and mot know what people are saying about you in prison. Mot met done. Mot met moving on. Unias world tilted. The R word, robbery, had been his shield. Now, the M word, murder, was being thrown in his face by the woman he thought he had conquered. And the other rumors, the insults, to his manhood. It was too much for his sociopathic ego to bear. Consoled. You think you re-going somewhere, he hissed, reaching into his waistband. Ah, you think you can just walk away after what you've done to me? Rosnay, Leroy, put that away. Kumba gasped, her eyes widening as she saw the dull glint of the pistol. On-bing again. They struggled. Kumba, ever the fighter, scratched at his face, her nails drawing blood. Her lanyard, the one that held her radio station ID, snapped and fell to the asphalt, unnoticed. NEVs tently, but Leroy was stronger. In a place where violence was the only language, he forced her into the passenger seat of her own car, as a woman he loved. He saw her as a piece of garbage that needed to be disposed of. For the Houston homicide blues, Ominablapres, Milucent. He was young, eager, and terrified of making a mistake. He had been assigned to lead the Cisse case, a sink of a scene that would have tested the most seasoned veteran. Think it, Mike, Brian Harris said, standing over the body of Kumba Cisse, near Jones High School. The scene talks. You just have to listen. Wenetized. They looked at the transform accused. The body had been dragged from a vehicle. She had been dumped like refuse. Wenurion. Perez noted, his notebook out. So, it wasn't a robbery. Omlis nodded. Had exactly. This was about money. This was personal. Look at the hair, the blood. It's a mess, but the medical examiner will tell us the story. Again, imitai state. They pulled the surveillance footage from the high school. It was grainy, black and white, and haunting. They saw the two headlights. They saw a small, bubble-shaped car stop. Onfigen. They saw a figure heavy toward the ditch. Wintabiden. Perez whispered, squinting at the screen. Olo falsize, madamain. Po, outer bolo, com chemeli, do, blue Volkswagen Beetle. Dosis, of at eyes. Harris and Perez spent their 4th of July in the morgue. The air was cold and smelled of chemicals and death. The contact wound. The doctor said, pointing to the stippling around the entry point, on Kamba's head. The gun was pressed against her skin. This wasn't a stray bullet. This was an execution. On Binam, the fingerprints came back. Kumba Sisei. The name meant nothing to the detectives at first, but, as they delved into her life, a picture began to emerge. A model. A radio host. A woman with everything to live for. Konitaish made. It was a moment he would never forget. The way Mrs. Sisei's face collapsed when she saw the suit and the badge. The way the air seemed to leave the room. Koningekaid. She was my girl, the mother wailed. She was going to be something. Might. The traptor of ashes. Contour. A fire. On ice. On July Sau, near the campus, Southern University, a blue Volkswagen Beetle was found torched. The arson investigators were professional, but the killer had been sloppy. Offered the oxnen that the Barnabin the oxygen aromatized. He had rolled up the windows before lighting the gasoline, starving the fire of the oxygen it needed to consume the evidence. Willis the bulb. He's not the brightest bulb, Harris remarked as they stood over the charred remains of Kumba's bubble, weightily traumatized. Inside, and a smear of blood on the driver's side door. And then a call came in from a concert promoter named Carlton Turner. Also desired. Mott found an ID, Turner said. At the warehouse where we had the party on Saturday night. It's got blood on it. All falling into place. The party, the warehouse, the car, the body. All they needed was the man. Otin traumatized. The detectives went to Style Radio. They took to Don Hilliard. They heard the name that would become the focal point of their lives for the next week. Leroy Stutz, when Nulitai traumatized. When Harris pulled a grim satisfaction. Murder. Mornin Chinin Chin Mihai. Served 18 years. This guy isn't a novice, Mike. He is a pro. Down the Buick Le Sabre, seen on the TSU surveillance tapes. The car that had picked up the person who torched the Beetle. It belonged to Latrice Stutz, Leroy's daughter. Unide says. It's a delicate dance, Harris told Perez. You have to build a relationship. You have to make her feel like she says, doing the right thing, even if it feels like betrayal. Awesome Snauchen. Perez took the lead. He was gentle, patient. He asked Latrice if she was close to her dad, all her eyes shifting. He has been away a long time. One briefly, old timber. Of hurting someone. More mean. Yeah, he can hurt people. And then the admission. He asked me to take him to the TSU campus. He got out, went to the Beetle, and then came back. Mod de no to see him burn it, mod swear. Winitad, it was enough. On bees. The murder board, but eating in ties. A week after the murder, stepping out of his mother's car, he looked older, tired, but his eyes remained cold. The eyes of a man who felt no remorse, only the inconvenience of being caught. Traumatized. In the interview room, Brian Harris decided to play a game. He knew Leroy thought he was the smartest person in the room. He knew the man's ego was his greatest weakness. Harris walked. He wrote the word M-U-R-D-E-R. No format, Harris said. His voice deceptively casual. What letter are we missing? Oh shit. Leroy stared at the board, his expression blank. An R. Osined again. An R. And that S what we have here. We have your boots with the blood on them. We have your DNA on Kumba's clothes. We have your daughter placing you at the scene of the burned car. We have the video. We have the motive. We have everything. Uspel's murder. We read just missing that final piece. Your story. Uno dice. A small mocking smile playing on his lips. Mod didn't do it. Mod met a genius. Mod covered my tracks. Wiegend leis nice. Yuri nodded. Leroy's, Harris said, leaning in until he was inches from the killer's face. We gadis hamatat. Mio's house, Manimat. At his cousin's house, with the victim's blood on them. Yuri, a man who let his daughter witness his crime. Yuri, a man who thought he could extinguish a light like Kumba a Sisei, and the world wouldn't notice. Oi didn't confess. Sociopaths rarely do. They view the truth as a tool, not a requirement. But it didn't matter. The evidence spoke for itself. Omilabi, the final freaklashin. Unan. The trial was a somber affair. The courtroom was filled with Kumbaf's friends, her family, and the listeners who had come to love her voice. Mrs. Sisei sat in the front row, her face a mask of grief and dignity. Quay, Lot. Guilty of murder in the first degree. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Leroy Stutz was sentenced to life, without the possibility of parole. He would die in the same system he had spent his life trying to outrun. Press outside the courthouse. Mrs. Sisei told Banoi. Motve kepa nodate him to live every day, knowing what he took. He didn't just kill my daughter. He killed a piece of the future. One to the Houston skyline. Watching Harris and Perez the Houston skyline. Watching the sunset over the Houston skyline. Ought Mike. Harris said, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. Your first lead case. You did her proud. On the air. Perez said, looking at the distant radio towers. One bohad. Somewhere in Ibi, it wasn't T-style radio, and it wasn't T. Kumba's voice, but the frequency remained. Matuayo. The city moved on, its heart beating to a rhythm of hip-hop and heat. But the memory of Kumba Sisei stayed. A reminder that even in the darkest corners of Houston, the light of a together life could never be fully extinguished. Oply. Kumba Sisei was a mover. She was a shaker, and in the end, she was the voice that finally brought a monster to justice. Author Sonabi. The Kumba Sisei story. Gwen traumatized. The weight of silence. Onekabi. Ten traumatized. The Houston humidity in July was more than just weather. It was a physical presence that moved through the streets of South Park like a damp, suffocating ghost. Wubit. Often Mursau. And accent Mayu. And the city was exhaling the heat of 1,000 air conditioners. Fasamers Tubite, of the 4th of July. Inting, traumatized. A young boy set step out into the blinding Texas sun. The world was vibrant. The grass a deep, thirsty green, the sky a bruised blue. Near a ditch across from Jones High School, he saw what he thought was a man sleeping off a long night. But children have an instinct for the unnatural. Wenomi timalt. The stillness of the figure drisdemafald. There was no rise and utfu, and fall of the chest. No twitch of a hand against a fly. Unbia silenced. He could not name. He ran for his father. Ace. Hey, wake up, the father called out. Standing a respectful distance away, the figure didn't move. When the father stepped closer, the illusion of sleep shattered. It wasn't a man. It was a woman, barely in her 30s, her life discarded in the dirt like a piece of unwanted history. Ophically, Houston. Marinated brisket and a chilled beer for the holiday. The Houston Police Department Homicide Division was waking up to a nightmare. The 4th of July was about independence, but for one woman, it had become the final boundary within. The golden girl of Houston tasted like ambition. Innovation, Onza, Deribi, traumatized, born to parents who had fled the civil unrest of Sierra Leone. Kumba carried the weight of her heritage with a grace that felt both ancient and modern. She was a child of the African diaspora, who had found her rhythm in the heart of Texas, Una Bedru. She didn't a model. She saw a mogul, Paulson of Style Radio, and Hani, de Traumatai. When the red on-air light flickered to life, Kumba became the city as confident, Bentantaby, to the heartly of the heartbeat. She would say, her voice a rich contralto that felt like a warm embrace. Motmet Kumba, and we here to talk about the hustle, the heart, and everything in between on their hip-hop artists. She was a bridge. She fashioned advice to gop girls who looked just like her and discussed the politics of the neighborhood with a sharp, uncompromising intellect. Would read to her mother, whose loved bright fabrics and big dreams. To Houston, she was a star on the rise, only traumatized, but every star has a shadow. Walked in the form of a man who claimed to understand her soul while quietly planning to own it. Goenditai, chapter, Du Cham, arm of Leroy Stutz, Onbi. Leroy Stutz didn't look like a monster. He looked like a survivor. He was older, with eyes that seemed to have seen the bottom of every bottle and the end of every dark road, Onaichinisti. A bad boy who had paid his debt to society for a youthful mistake. A robbery he claimed he took the fall for to protect a friend. Omitly. Kumba, whose heart was as large as her ambitions, believed in the power of redemption. She saw Leroy as a project, a man who just needed the right woman to illuminate the path to his potential, or the second chance. Mama, she told her mother over a dinner of jollof rice and fried plantains. Her mother, whose instincts had been sharpened by the tragedies of a distant war, remained silent. She saw the way Leroy looked at Kumba, not with love, but with a hunger for her light. Rominais, the romance of late whispered Tess. Whispered. Promises. Leroy started appearing at the radio station. He began to co-host, his gravelly voice providing a counterpoint to Kumba's silk. But the Style Radio family noticed the shift. Guinfam. He wanted to supplant her, oninically. He was jealous of during photo, shoot, and most of all, her independence. He began to check her phone under the guise of protection. He questioned why she needed to interview certain male artists. The sanctuary of their love was slowly becoming a cage. Bear. The Red Light and the Rage, a Tuesday night broadcast. Kumba had invited a local female activist to discuss empowering women in the community. Leroy, sitting across from her, felt his grip slipping. He interrupted, his tone turning acidic. then outright hostile. Light. About power, Leroy sneered into the microphone, his face contorting. But you don't know the first thing about loyalty. Onthrotized. The broadcast ended in a tense silence. Behind the glass, Don Hilliard, the general manager, was fuming. Liability. Kumba, Don said. Later, the studio lights casting long shadows across the soundboard. Mott can't have him on the air. He's degrading the platform you built. Komrud often fight. One or the face of that night. From the show died, it was the first time she's true face of the man she loved. It wasn't the face of a survivor. It was the face of a predator. He didn't yell. He simmered, a cold, calculating rage that made the air in their apartment feel thin. Shortly after this, the robbery Leroy had mentioned, it was a lie. The 18 years he spent in prison weren't for a property crime. They were for a murder. He had taken a life before, and, as Kumba realized she was tied to a killer, the romance died, replaced by a cold, sharp terror. Guibun. The final Independence Day. Ulmekais. Hommesaunabi began with a sense of finality. Kumba visited her mother one last time. And she was beautiful in the morning light, her hair perfectly styled, her eyes bright with a resolve she hadn't felt in months. Beitendi. Lushan mama, whispered. Mot met going to a party, a public place. Mot leglung tell him there. He want to do anything where people can see. Blue Vesvogsenbite beetle. Her pride and joy, a symbol of her hard-earned success. To a warehouse party in southeast Houston. The music was a wall of sound, a mix of heavy bass and celebratory cheers. But in the parking lot, the atmosphere was different. It was waiting. Leroy was followed her, his Buick Le Sabre, idling in the shadows like a shark in dark water. Oskul, when Kumba stepped out covetized. Party, humidity felt like a physical weight. She saw him. She didn't run. She stood her ground. Oliroy. Mot kano ove kep about your past. Mot kano ove kep about everything. Get out of my life. Hudmeter. Rejection was a capital offense. He saw Kumba not as a human being, but as a mirror that showed him his own failures. If he could have her light, no one would. He forced her into the beetle. A struggle ensued. A desperate, violent dance in the cramped confines of the carrier. Hat, Kumba fought. Ve kep, ite. Had every ounce of her Sierra Leonean spirit. She scratched his face, leaving marks that would later become a map for the police. But Leroy had brought a gun to a breakup. Old, a sink traumatized. Close contact, the stippling of gunpowder on her skin, was the final signature of a man who claimed to love her. Wham. The homicide desk. Onaby, Banley. Detective Michael Perez was sipping his first coffee on Sunday morning when his phone vibrated. It was his first lead case. Beside him was Sergeant Brian Harris, a man who had seen high years of Houston's darkest hours. Vutais. They arrived at the ditch in South Park. Harris looked at the body, the jewelry, still intact, the expensive clothes, the lack of defensive wounds other than the struggle marks. This isn't a random act, Mike, Harris said, his eyes narrowed against the sun. Somebody wanted her dead, but they did it want her things. They wanted her. Konititi weekend. The investigation moved with the frantic energy of Aeolitli weekend. They found her car missing. They found her fingerprints. When the name Kumba Sisay popped up on the screen, the room went cold. She was a celebrity. This wasn't just a murder. It was a headline. It was traumatized. Perez handled the death notification home with a heavy heart. He walked his suit feeling too tight, his badge feeling like a lead weight. When Mrs. Cisse saw him, she knew. Before a word was spoken, the air was filled with the sound of a mother's hearts shattering, offing a sail. The trail of the beetle, Odin traumatized. The search spot for the blue beetle led them to the campus of Texas Southern University. There, across from a dormitory, they found a charred skeleton of a car. Leroy had tried to burn the evidence, but his arrogance was his undoing. Interlighting quinchu, starving the flame of oxygen they needed to consume the interior. Barnaby, owning a side door. Barnaby. The car was damaged. On the driver's side door, detectives found a smear of blood. Onby, the campus, showed a Buick LeSabre, a car registered to Leroy's daughter, Latrice. It showed a figure running from the burning beetle into the Buick. The web was beginning to tighten, or from Daryl, Leroy's cousin, owning traumatized. He came to my house that night, Daryl whispered into the phone, his voice trembling with the fear of a man who knew he was betraying a killer. He had blood on his face. He had blood on his clothes. He left his boots here. Untais, again. The boots were brown leather, stained with a dark forensics confirmed it. The blood on the boots belonged to Kumba Sisei. Quamatais. The interrogation of a sociopath, on the Roy Stutes, sat in the interrogation room with the stillness of a statue. He had been through this before. He knew the rhythm of the questions, the way the detectives tried to build a bridge of empathy. On Hoofenful. He was looking for the R on the whiteboard and wrote M-U-R-D-E. Leroy. Harris said. You read his voice low and steady. You know what word this is. It is missing one letter. You read that letter. You read the final piece of this puzzle. The pull score of heroes. He did down traumatized. Indifference. He didn't blink when they showed him the photos of the boots. He didn't flinch when they told him his own daughter had placed him at the burning car. Do nothing, Leroy said, his voice a flat, dead thing. Kumba was my girl. I loved her. Please, Dewey said. Then his lies, the scratches on his face, the DNA in the car, the testimony of his own blood. Leroy Stutes wasn't a lover. He was a black hole that had consumed a star. Oising star. Chapter Tam, Inchiliut, was a somber affair. The courtroom was packed with Kumba's fans, her family, and the artists she had championed. They wore justice for Kumba pins and sat in a silence that felt like a prayer. Monter Tate. They showed the stippling marks, the evidence of a murder committed at point-blank range. They played the surveillance tapes. They showed the bloody boots. Moyavis. Miss. When the jury went with a guilty verdict, there were no cheers, only a collective exhale. Leroy was sentenced to life, without parole. He would spend the rest of his days in a cage, far from the light he had tried so desperately to steal. When, epilogue, the echo on the airwaves, Onofin radio, the Phil Fonofin Tukleis, Houston Inn, moved on, as Citizen always went. But at Style Radio, there is a corner of the studio that remains quiet. Auntie Towers. She didn't get to see her mother grow old. She became a statistic in the grim ledger of domestic violence. A reminder that the most dangerous moment for a woman is the moment she decides to be free. On the woman the great. Tinfe be traumatized, but sometimes, when the sun sets over the bayou, I begin to flicker. If you tune your radio to just the right frequency, You can almost hear her. Over. Dude Oatbomber. Traumatized. A velvet voice over the gravel of the city reminding to chase their dreams, to outrun their demons, and to never, ever let someone else own their light. Unabating end. Huos the Mapricofon. The Tragedy of Kumba Sisay. Binay. Prologue. The Sleeping Summer. Bali July is a physical weight. A wet blanket that smothers the senses before the sun has even reached its zenith. On the morning of July Ba, hiking Komui Sao, the South Park neighborhood felt this weight more than most. Guani Ace, Hinchley said. A time for the smell of charcoal grills, the clinking of ice in sweet tea, and the distant, rhythmic pop of early firecrackers. Old from Jonalt High School. He was searching for the remnants of a firework from the night before, his mind filled with the simple joys of a summer holiday weekend. A man. Bor. Something that didn't belong in the festive. Or so, he thought at first glance. Was sleeping in the tall yellowed gra, but the posture was wrong. The body was twisted in a way that defied the natural relaxation of sleep. Wantelgating. The stillness was not peaceful, it was profound and terrifying. Oh, he fathered, his sneakers, pounding the sun-baked pavement, his voice cracking with a fear he couldn't yet named. Dad, someone sentai, sleeping out there, right by the school. He wanted wake up. Mud yelled, but he wanted move. Onchen traumatized. The father, a man who had seen the rougher edges southeast side, arrived at the edge of the ditch, his own heart quickening. He shouted a greeting, then a command, and then he saw the dark, viscous reality beneath the body. Woman bitubatized. Her vibrant life extinguished and discarded. Her face was obscured by a curtain of braids and a terrible, unmistakable signature of violence. Ona through the city, in Teftomen, offer reaching Mai Shiktibi. Call Mar followed would ripple through the city, eventually reaching the desks of two men. Oronabi, a fear. Kepei, they had 22 years of navigating the darkest alleys of the homicide division, and Michael Perez had a young investigator were with only 3 months in the unit, looking to prove he had the rare breath required to solve the unsolvable. It was be Mintias Kameramai, Borbin Liskai, Nori Light. But before the crime scene photographer's camera, there was a girl with a voice that could command the wind. We mort. The golden girl of Houston, when he said, did not just enter a room, she colonized it, continuing instantly. Kumba carried the hopes of 2 continents on her shoulders. Her name, a melody in itself, was a constant reminder of the diamond-veined soil of Central Africa. Her parents had Lo e Epte behind for the concrete promise of Texas. Omi Ibrestif, Entlicist. To her mother and father, Kumba, American dream, in a sundress, radiant, ambitious, and possessed of a drive that made the stagnant air of Houston feel like it was moving. Grown up in the vibrant, often chaotic melting pot of Houston, a city of strip malls, bayous, and hidden gems. By 31, Kumba had carved out a space for herself that most only dreamed of, offerhootning in its eyes, she was gracing local campaigns. But her true throne was not in front of a lens, it was behind a microphone, in their ties. Nestled in a nondescript building that served as the heartbeat of Houston's independent hip-hop scene, Kumba was the undisputed queen, Geninchine. When she donned her professional-grade headphones, the world outside, the grueling traffic on I-45, the oppressive heat, the daily struggles of a freelance life, faded into a soft blur. Quashiwikately, Tentlint. You are internet radio show, she would say, her voice a masterclass in tone. A smooth blend of velvet and honey with just enough rasp to keep things interesting. Kandinti night. We read talking about more than just music. We read talking about the soul of this city. We read talking about legacy. Und die Band. Odegar. She was a catalyst. She interviewed local rappers, gave Felt the World sage advice to the lovelorn callers who flooded her lines, and debated social issues with a fiery intellect that left more seasoned pundits scrambling. Quisnomitin, a shinning case, pinning again. The verge of a national breakthrough. Her boss, Donald Hilliard. Hilliard looked at her and saw a star. Her friends saw a sister who would give you her last dollar. Late. And then, in the middle of this ascending trajectory, came Leroy. Onegri. The shadow and the light. Onetinomatized. They met on a night when the Houston skyline then was a jagged crown of neon. Leroy Stutz was older, possessing a rugged, dangerous charisma that often lures women who have spent their lives being good. Usinkumpamatized. He was a man of few words, but the ones he spoke seemed weighted with a gravity that Kumba found intriguing. It was Oprotide, a man who had been through the fire and come out tempered. He told her a story that tugged at Moat. Fai, her empathetic heart, the kind of story she often covered on her show. He had been to prison, yes, but he told her it was for a robbery. He claimed he a noble sacrifice that led to 18 years behind bars. Only traumatized. Leroy Woodvekep Ateje had her in the studio, sitting in the corner like a silent sentinel, his eyes fixed on her as she commanded the airwaves. He was the bad boy who seemed reformed by her light. On to be anchor. He sweat to be. Over onkum, she could be the anchor. The ently that kept him from drifting back into the abyss of his past. Kubi, he said, Mom, she told her mother, Mrs. Saisei, on a Saturday morning in June as they sat in the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of jollof rice. He had a hard life, but he trying. He just needs someone to see the man he is now, not the boy he was then. Oskelwen felt tented. Immigrant intuition is a sharp tool honed by surviving real-world monsters. She saw the way Leroy's hand would tighten on Kumba's arm, just a second too long. Wickedly, Finchaced. She saw the way he looked at Kumba, not with the soft gaze of a lover, but with the terrifying, unblinking sense of ownership of a man who had finally found a prize he intended to keep. In a cage. Baba. The green-eyed monster. Off in a bent. The cracks in the facade began to show when Kuba's light became too bright for Leroy to tolerate. On-tide. In a gesture of love, and perhaps a naive hope, to help him build a new life, Kumba began inviting Leroy onto the show as a co-host. At first, it felt like a romantic partnership. The queen and her consort were enfantized, but the microphone is a truth-teller, and it revealed a stark reality. Kumba was a natural, a beloved professional who knew how to pivot and engage. Leroy was a thug trying to play a role he hadn't earned. Omalat was brutal. They didn't want Leroy's mumbles or his aggressive interjections. They wanted Kumba's warmth, wanting anatomy. Leroy would growl. The interior of her blue Volkswagen Beetle feeling smaller by the second. You think you read better than me because these kids on Twitter like you? We traumatize. It's my show, Kumba would respond, her voice tired. Maud built this from nothing. Maud met trying to bring you up with me, but you have to learn the craft. You can't just talk at people. Bintant, the jealousy wide by traumatized. Curdling into a dark, silent rage. It reached a boiling point when Kumba invited another woman to co-host a special segment on female empowerment. Leroy went wild. In his twisted logic, any space Kumba occupied without him was a betrayal. On Modicine say, behind glass in the studioized. He erupted into a rant so degrading, filled with such vitriol and misogyny, that Donald Hilliard had to physically pull the plug on the broadcast. Inchiniter. You redone here, Leroy. Hilliard told him, his voice firm as he pointed toward the exit. You re-jeopardizing Kumba's career and everything this station stands for. Comatize. He looked at Kumba. She saw the void in his eyes. He did blame his own actions. He blamed her. In his mind, her success was his humiliation. Intally. The revelation and the fear defies his tent. The final weeks finally shattered completely. Konegunning Ruispi had been lingatized. A seeker of truth by profession and nature. The rumors began to trickle in from the underground intelligence network of Houston. The barbershops, the clubs, the old associates who knew the name Leroy Stutz und Phil Kumba. Her friend Latasha White told her over coffee at a small cafe on Westheimer. Latasha's voice was barely a whisper. The word is, it was murder. Cold, blooded, back in Chinmihai. He got 45 years and only served 18 because of some loophole or parole board mistake. Only Schentel, traumatized. The blood drained from she shared her bed with. The man she had defended to her mother was a killer. Omnintives. Then came the darker, more intimate rumors, whispers about Leroy State Penitentiary. Inside the walls of the Texas State Penitentiary, there were rumors of a sexual history to keep quiet, a direct contradiction to the hyper-masculine tag persona he cultivated on the streets. When Kumba finally found the courage to confront him, the bad boy charm vanished, replaced by the cold, vacuous stare of a true sociopath. Ovenabin. Mot met done, Leroy, Kumba whispered, the decision finally solidifying like concrete in her heart. Mot can't do this anymore. You lied about the prison, you lied about the murder, you lied about everything. Offer Trom in her exit note. But, as Detective Harris would grim experience, the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is the moment she decides to leave. The predator realizes the prey is escaping, and the reaction is often terminal. Unnam. The night of the warehouse, Odulistu Omuisau. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the anticipation of the coming holiday. Kumba was dressed to kill. Not literally, but with the defiant confidence of a woman reclaiming her autonomy. Committee commute promoter. She was going to a party hosted by Con Turner, a prominent concert promoter, at a warehouse on the southeast side. Edwin. She drove her pride and joy, a blue Volkswagen Beetle. It was a bubble-shaped car that matched her personality, bright, unique, and impossible to ignore. In shadowed, she couldn't again. To shake, okay tool traumatized. The confrontation happened in the parking lot. As the party wound down around Mumodze Home Food PM, the warehouse lights flickered, and the muffled thump of distant bass provided a rhythmic backdrop to the struggle. Traumatized. Will you stop? Kumba's voice echoed off the corrugated metal walls. Mot told you. It is over. Go home, Leroy. Mot met, not going with you. We and the ice. Now walk away, Leroy. His voice was a low, vibrating hiss. After Mot gave you my time, after I shared my life, you read nothing without me. Quitting traumatized. He grabbed her purse. He grabbed her arm. He his attentively. Her skin, Kumba, was a shaker, and she fought back with every ounce of her strength. She scratched at his face, her nails drawing blood in a jagged line above his eye. Her lanyard, carrying her radio ID, snapped in the scuffle and fell unnoticed into the oil-stained gravel against the back comatized. Then the cold, heavy steel of a pistol pressed against the back of her head. The investigation would later describe this moment, but the reality was a nightmare. Leroy forced her into her own car. Her sanctuary turned into a cage. He was so consumed by his own rage that he didn't see the ID card lying on the ground. Called imbecile. Of many mistakes a sociopath makes when he believes he is a genius. Infant, autist. A single close contact wound to the head. The vibrant voice of Houston was silenced in a flash of gunpowder and heat. Wayne Monser. Viol Moyinur, Aquez. Leroy was in a panic, but it was the command who had been through the system before. He drove Kumba's Blue Beetle to the South Park neighborhood, choosing a spot he felt was sufficiently anonymous. Agreed, momatized. He stopped the car across from. He dragged her out, leaving what the detectives would call transfer blood, and dumped her in the ditch like she was a piece of garbage. To a common thief, jewelry, with the prize. To a domestic killer, the prize is the silence of the victim. On vue on, Bintain Tentlace, then drove the Beetle to head house cousin, Darrell's house. He arrived with blood spattered on his clothes, and the fresh scratches on his face, throbbing, traumatized. Mott need a change of clothes, told Darrell, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. And don't ask any damn questions if you know what is good for you. Offling again, ni often come listen wide. Darrell caught the sheer terror Leroy projected, gave him a new shirt and shoes. But Leroy, in his arrogant haste, left behind a pair of brown polo boots. Undikoti again. They sat in the corner of the room, silent witnesses, all Kumbatais, with Kumba SC, DNA, clinging to the letter, waiting for a dinter, a detective with the patience to find them. Ontobai. The investigated. Warning. Detective Brian Harris sat at his kitchen table, July, Barrad,